Now, former England striker and broadcaster Aluko has criticised X, formerly known as Twitter, for allowing people to vomit their hatred unchecked.
This is after Any faced a wave of online abuse following comments made by ex-footballer Joey Barton about women working in the men's game. Now, our disinformation and social media correspondent Marianna has tracked down one of the trolls who jumped on the back of those comments, and Marianna and Any join us now. Good morning to you both. Marianna, I suppose we should start with you, just in terms of, you know, often these trolls, more often than not, are faceless, aren't they? You actually came face to face with one who actually didn't really know he was a troll.
Exactly that, Naga. I think one of the things that is so revealing when you actually track people down and speak to them is the difference between what people say when their name and face are put to it and what they say when actually they don't have a picture of themselves and they don't have their name included. And I like to sometimes refer to these sorts of accounts as the shock troops. So often a big account will target an individual, as happened in Any's case, and then a series of smaller accounts will go out and send explicitly abusive messages directed at that person, often misogynistic or racist in their nature. The person who I tracked down agreed to speak to me. They weren't the most extreme example of some of the people sending hate, but they still had made some really harmful and hurtful comments, including, you know, wishing that Any's safety could be compromised in some way, and some really nasty stuff. And so it's really important to be able to ask people questions and to understand why they're behaving the way they do, to hold them to account, as I tried to do with the person who'd done this, but also, you know, really unpicking almost this idea that people don't realise that this is real life, that there's a real person that they're directing this at, and that there are repercussions, consequences, impact for posting that kind of content. You know, this is someone who basically said to me, well, I go on my iPad and then I write this kind of stuff, I close it and I go off to sleep. And this is almost a kind of activity that I do in the evenings.
Marianna, just a quick thought that often the thinking is that people don't realise the damage they're doing or the consequences of what they're saying when it's done on social media like that. So with the person you met who remained anonymous, did it change his behaviour? Do you know if that has had that effect?
So I questioned him and challenged him on the content he was sharing, and he did turn around and say that he thought he had taken it too far with some of those messages and that he regretted it, that he, you know, apologised for sharing them and the harm they caused. He hasn't directed so far any more hate at Any, but I have noticed that there are other hateful comments being shared about different people. So I think that to some extent, if you really talk to someone about this kind of stuff, it can allow them to reflect on it and to, you know, express their regret. But at the same time, you can't. It's not a quick fix, really. And then that comes, you know, that's when we then need to start thinking about the way that the social media sites work to allow this kind of thing to happen. They would say that's not the case, but hate is thriving, and this kind of behaviour is very, very common.
Any, morning to you.
Good morning.
What was the impact of... It was almost the pylon, wasn't it, after Joey Barton's tweet? It was after... And you had to be notified of it from your producers. What was the impact of it on you?
Well, the impact of it is... I can only really describe it as feels like a wave, sort of waves caving in on you, really. I think the nature of Joey Barton's tweets were consecutive over a course of a week. There were several tweets. He continued to double down even after ITV came out in mine and Lucy Ward's defence. He continued to double down and actually was deliberately trying to sort of get worse and incite other people to say the same. So this is probably one of the worst cases of social media abuse I've ever experienced. Obviously, it's not something I've not experienced before. It's part of a culture that I think many women in broadcasting have had to sort of put up with for a long time now. But here you have somebody in Joey Barton who has millions of followers, who is actively, you know, targeting people like me in order to generate attention. We're in this attention economy on X, and we have a platform on X that actively promotes people like Joey Barton's content through the algorithms and through the way that X is now constructed. So I just don't accept the argument that actually it's just a platform that people can express their freedom of speech. I've been driven off the platform and my freedom of speech is not protected. So certain people's freedom of speech, like Joey Barton, which is hateful, attacks people on the basis of their gender and their race is being actively promoted. And that's where I think we really need to start thinking about what the social media platforms like X, how much responsibility and how much negligence now they have.
Do you actually think anything's going to change? I mean, I've had this conversation for years now about what the social media companies are accepting are their responsibilities. And there's the counter-argument as well, that if you're in the public eye, then you should expect to be criticised. And I completely agree. Absolutely in no way is misogyny, racism, any hate speech acceptable. But do you really think anything's going to change?
Well, I think, I think working with the likes of Marianna to actually identify who these types of people are is really important, because that's where consequence comes in, right? So you mentioned there, criticism is part of my job, but there's always a line. And if you go beyond criticism into racism and sexism and misogyny, then we're actually breaking the law. There are laws that mean that somebody like me as a black woman is protected, and so you just can't freely discriminate. So to that extent, I think the ability to identify who people are, I think it's really important to work with Marianna, because she actively identifies these people, so that to really send the message out that there are consequences for this behaviour. So I think that there is a way of changing through consequence. I believe in consequence. I believe that changes behaviour. And, I'm actively working now with many organisations to make sure that becomes the norm. The police have also been contacted about this behaviour. They have a responsibility as well to protect women who are under attack, who are deliberately under attack. So I think things can only change through consequence. And I think that's the way it's happened throughout society, and that's what I'm committed to being part of, that change through consequence.
Eni, thanks very much. Eni Aluko, their former England footballer, broadcaster, and Marianna, thank you very much. Marianna Spring, our disinformation and social media correspondent. More on Marianna's podcast, which is called Why Do You Hate Me?, available on BBC Sounds and the BBC iPlayer.